Hello, my name is Whisper the Wolf, and today I will be reading Recess, an episode got horribly wrong. Recess Lost Episode Creepypasta. This was read by Ondell and the Shadow Reader, respectively. I decided to read this because, apparently the creator for this channel, Bailey Maloney, wanted me to read this one. So, I thought, yes, I will read this. And I'll make a video of me reading this episode. Alright, so, ready or not? Let's get reading. I do not know how the tape came into my possession. All I know is that I found it in one of my drawers while I was clearing them out in preparation for moving to a new house. It was a VHS tape with a plain white label, Recess R1109, New, Return to C, was written on it in a thin black permanent marker. Whoever wrote it had very poor penmanship. It was barely legible. Like anyone who had watched Recess as a child, nostalgia overcame me. I placed the tape in my old VCR and pressed play. It began with a blue screen. It stayed like that for a few minutes, and then started flashing red. 30 seconds later, it cut to black. Thinking that the tape was wrecked, I went over to press eject. Before I reached the button, the Recess opening started, albeit with really poor compression quality. The video was blurry and the audio was muddy, but I kept watching to see if anything weird would happen. The episode, The Rules, started and began playing out like the television broadcast version. Since the previous owner apparently took poor care of this tape, the vertical hold became progressively worse as it went on. Another thing that was off was the voice acting. The voices seemed to randomly fluctuate in quality, even in the middle of a sentence. For example, in one sentence, Gus would sound like himself. In the next, he would sound like the voice actor didn't really want to be there. The animation was technically sound, with the exception of some of the facial expressions. In certain scenes, the main characters' faces did not match with the emotions they were trying to convey. In these peculiar scenes, TJ looked angry, Vince looked tired, Spinelli looked anxious, Gretchen looked depressed, Mikey looked high, complete with bloodshot eyes, and Gus looked as if he genuinely hated everyone around him. A couple of minutes in, the episode completely jumped the tracks and went insane. At the scene where Vince was ordered to go into the dumpster and find a piece of fruit, it was taking him longer to find it than it should have. Then the sound of the garbage truck pulling up could be heard. Guys? Gus said. Everyone turned and saw the garbage truck. Everyone except TJ ran. TJ tried to help Vince get out, but eventually failed and ran away. The garbage truck picked up the dumpster and emptied its contents, including Vince, and began to crush them. Vince's screams in this scene sounded incredibly genuine, like the person doing his voice was actually being crushed to death. This whole time, everyone was looking in shock. When the screaming ceased, Randall began crying for a moment and ran off yelling, "Miss Finster!" like he always did. Everyone else started crying. The screen faded to black. 30 seconds later, the scene abruptly cut to TJ walking home with his hands over his eyes. There was no sound at all for this part. The animation had really dropped in quality, like it was done by someone in their basement as opposed to a professional animation studio. It focused on TJ walking down a long road for a couple of minutes, with the vertical hold getting worse the whole time. After a while, it cut to TJ lying in bed, crying quietly. It was quite genuine, too. I could really hear the pain in his voice. Rather than cutting to black, after the scene ended, it showed the remaining 5 students walking to school in the rain. None of them cared about the rain. In addition to some cuts and bruises, Mikey looked even bloated than usual. Gretchen's glasses were shattered, Spinelli's hair was dirty and all over the place. Gus was wearing a black sweatshirt as opposed to his usual get-up. TJ's hat was on with the bill facing forwards. I'm sorry. They all were incredibly depressed. Vertical hold was so bad at this point that I could barely tell what was going on. It looked like the remaining children were just sitting in class, occasionally cutting to an empty desk. Finally, the vertical hold finally calmed down to the point where I could see. The depressing mundane atmosphere went on until Gus pulled out a pen. He rammed it through his eye. TJ tried to stop him, but Gus ended up bleeding out until he fell over dead. Blood continuously dripped down his neck and pooled onto the floor. Nobody else seemed to care. Everyone went to lunch after that class. Mikey engorged himself on whatever he could find until eventually he grabbed his chest and rolled around on the floor, screaming. Ultimately, his eyes rolled back in his head. He twitched once and stopped moving. TJ barely tried to help this time. Nevertheless, he did become more depressed after Mikey died. The scene cut to the playground again. TJ and Spinelli were kicking a can back and forth, both expressing minimal interest in what they were doing. They looked as if they were on the verge of killing themselves. Gretchen silently walked past them and began climbing up Old Rusty. When she was at the top, she got ready to jump off. What was especially strange was that instead of looking depressed, the kids at the playground, with the exception of TJ and Spinelli, were shouting angrily at Gretchen. Most of them were chanting, "Do it! Jump!" or something similar. Randall called Miss Finster, and even she came over and joined in the chanting. "We gotta stop her!" yelled TJ, and he and Spinelli ran over and climbed to the top. And this is where I will stop for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 of Whisper Reads Recess, an episode gone horribly wrong.